Hello everyone, my name is Mrs. Beck and you are taking biology. We're going to start by learning about macromolecules, which, well, micro means small, so what does macro mean? Oh, large. So macromolecules are large molecules. And when we say large, we mean thousands of atoms. Most molecules have 2 to 20, maybe 30, but certainly not thousands, and so those would be considered macromolecules. Now, often macromolecules are made of monomers. Monomers are little individual building block molecules. The prefix mono means one. A way that I remember that is that if you're sick with mono, you have to say by yourself, just one person, so you don't contaminate everybody else. So that helps me remember monomer is one unit of a molecule. You put a lot of monomers together and you get a polymer. Poly means many. So the way I remember that is you've got this parrot sitting on your shoulder going, Polly wants many crackers. Many, poly. So that helps me remember polymer. Now, all polymers are types of macromolecules, but not all macromolecules are polymers. Polymers have to have repeating blocks. Macromolecules may or may not be repeating. So we're going to learn about 4 categories of macromolecules, and the first are carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, which is the polymer, are made of sugars, and the sugars are the monomers. The names of sugars are easily recognizable because they usually end in ose, O-S-E. For example, glucose, maltose, fructose, and sucrose are all sugars. Sucrose is table sugar. Fructose is fruit sugar. So those are some examples. If you read the ingredient list on your food, if you see something with ose at the end of the name, that's a hidden sugar that has been added to that food. Now, examples of carbohydrates, first of all, include starches. Starch is how plants store energy. For example, potatoes have lots of starch, and a potato is used by the potato plant to store energy. Now, we, of course, can eat it and get that energy, but the plant had intended it to use to store energy. The way animals store energy is in the form of glycogen. This stores energy in the liver and the muscles of animals. And its glycogen is easily converted to glucose, which is the simplest sugar, and that's what your body uses for energy. So plants store as starches, animals store as glycogen. So when you eat starch, your body breaks it down into glucose for quick energy, and some of the glucose is stored as glycogen. And then when you need that energy later, it's converted back into glucose. Now, there are also 2 other forms of carbohydrates used in plants and animals, and those are cellulose and chitin. Cellulose is found in the cell walls of plants, and it provides structure or support. For example, if you build a structure, you build a building. You have to build some support for that building, some columns, otherwise it will collapse. So cellulose acts as the structure and the support when cells build their cell walls in plants. Now, when animal cells need extra support, they're going to use chitin, C-H-I-T-I-N. And chitin is what's in the exoskeleton of arthropods like crabs and lobsters, or in fungi like mushrooms. So chitin is used to support animal and fungus cells. So what are carbohydrates used for? First of all, they provide quick energy. That's why athletes will often eat a meal with lots of carbohydrates before they play a game, because they're trying to do carb loading, storing up that quick energy that they plan to use very soon when they play their sports game. Carbohydrates are used for short-term energy storage, and they provide the structure for the cell wall in plants, as we've already learned. Starch is very easy for you to digest, but we humans have a very difficult time digesting cellulose. Cellulose for us is basically roughage or fiber. Fiber stays undigested, but it helps material move through your intestines. It helps you poop. So, most carnivores and most omnivores who eat meat or meat and vegetables cannot digest cellulose. That's why they have to eat meat to get the energy and the nutrients. However, herbivores like cows can digest cellulose. How is that possible? Well, cows have special bacteria that live in their stomach and help digest the cellulose. So that's why you can't digest cellulose. For example, when you eat corn, have you ever noticed you poop the corn out the other end? Well, that's the cellulose covering of the corn. On the inside was the starch. You digested the insides, and then the wrapper is the cellulose, and that was the part you did not digest. So, how come the corn is like poofed back up into corn shape when you poop it out the other end? Well, it's because it's filled back up with poop. And that's what gives it that corn shape again instead of a flattened corn cellulose covering. So, some examples of foods with carbohydrates include fruits and vegetables. And especially your white foods are very often very simple carbohydrates that are broken down quickly and easily into sugar. And for example, sugar itself is a category of carbohydrates. Bread or anything made with flour. So, for example, cake, crackers, cookies, anything made of flour is a simple carbohydrate. Potatoes are carbohydrates, rice, pasta, which of course is made with flour, and corn. Now, corn isn't quite white, but it's a pale yellow. So, these food items are very, very high in simple carbohydrates. Here's why it's important to know what a simple and a complex carbohydrate are. Simple carbohydrates are very easily broken down into sugar, and that tends to help you add weight. But complex carbohydrates like brown bread, wheat bread, brown rice, whole grains like oats, those your body has to work harder to digest them. And so those don't put on as much weight. And they're healthier for you. They have more fiber that helps the food move through your digestive system. So there's two basic kinds of carbs, sugar and starch. And there's simple starches, which break down into sugar. And then there's complex starches, complex carbs, that take longer to digest and longer to break down that are healthier for you. So it turns out that sugar makes you fat. Fat doesn't make you fat. Isn't that weird? See, that's part of why diets can be so confusing. And we'll learn more about that later. Next, we're going to learn about lipids. Examples of lipids include fats, oils, waxes, and hormones. Hormones can be either lipids or proteins. So the hormones that are lipids include testosterone, estrogen, and steroids. Now, lipids do have more calories per gram than protein or carbohydrates. That's why people think fat, which is a lipid, makes people fat. And if you eat tons of it, it can, especially if you eat lots of fat and lots of sugars or simple carbs together. But there's a diet called the keto diet where you eat lots and lots of fat and you still lose weight because you're not eating the carbohydrates with it. Lipids do have more calories per gram than proteins or carbohydrates. For example, fats have 9 calories per gram, which is the weight, and carbs and proteins have 4 calories per gram. So that's more than twice as much calories per gram of fat. But you do have to have fat in your diet to get full. Plus, fat has a lot of fat-soluble vitamins, like your B vitamins. And so it's very important to have fat in your diet. Kind of weird, huh? There are 2 main categories of fat, saturated and unsaturated. Saturated fats are not as good for you. They're usually found in animal fats, like butter, which is made from cow milk, and lard, which is made from straight animal fat. And these are solids at room temperature. So solid fats are more likely to be less good for you. They can contribute to heart disease and they can form deposits in your arteries. Unsaturated fats are the healthy ones. They're found in plants, vegetables, and fish. So, for example, olive oil is a healthy fat. Corn oil and fish oil are all healthy fats. Also, fat from nuts is also healthy. These are usually liquids at room temperature, and these are your healthier fats. So, what is fat used for in the body? Or lipids? Because all fats are lipids, but not all lipids are fats. So, fat is a category of lipid. And lipids are used for long term energy storage, just like your body does store energy as fat. If you don't use that energy quickly by using up your carbohydrates, then your body will turn it into fat and store it. And that's very concentrated energy. As we've already said, it's got twice as much energy, twice as many calories as carbohydrates or proteins. And the cell membrane, the wrapper around each individual cell in your body, is made from phospholipids. It's a lipid with a phosphate on it. Each cell is not coated with fat. It's got a wrapper of lipid, which is not a fat, it's a category of lipid. Similar to fat, but not quite the same. And lipids, like fat, are used to cushion your organs. For example, women generally have a little more fat in their belly than men because their body has that cushioning in case they ever have a baby. And fats and lipids can also be used for insulation. Like whale blubber, whale fat keeps a whale warm while it's in the cold water. Also, hormones, like we said, some hormones are lipids, and they carry chemical messages from one part of the body to another. So, for example, estrogen and testosterone will carry the message to your body, hey, you need to start going through these changes, and this needs to start happening, and it tells your body to begin that process. Examples of foods with lipids include mostly greasy stuff, like oil, that's greasy, margarine and butter, those are greasy, and fat, that's kind of greasy. So if it's greasy, it's probably a lipid. Then the third category of macromolecules are proteins. Proteins are made from amino acids. So protein is the polymer, the large molecule, and it's made from the monomer, the small molecule, amino acids. There are actually 20 different amino acids, and you put them together in different orders into a long string that makes a protein. And these proteins fold up into all different shapes, and that particular shape of that protein makes it able to do its job. And if you're not sure what something is, it's probably a protein. Proteins do most of the jobs in your body. For example, one protein gives you your eye color. Another protein makes your nails. Another protein makes your muscles. A different protein makes your heart muscle compared to your arm muscles. Digestive enzymes are proteins. They are found in the stomach and they help you to digest your food. Pepsin is an example of a digestive enzyme, and that's a protein. Insulin is another protein. It helps control your blood sugar, and that's actually a hormone. Now, that's not your sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen, but it is a hormone. It carries a message to your body about your blood sugar levels. Hemoglobin is the part of your blood cells that carries oxygen. That's another protein. So see, proteins do all these weird things that you would never really think of. Now let's go back. The job of a protein is called its function. A function is a job or what it's used for. And the shape of a protein is very, very important because that helps it do its job. And remember, we talked about these proteins are all these amino acids linked together, and then the amino acids fold up into a certain shape. But that shape can be unfolded or denatured. So if a protein gets denatured, it doesn't work anymore. It can't do its job. There's two ways to denature a protein: temperature and pH. Usually, if it's too hot, that's when the protein denatures, unfolds, and it doesn't work right. This is why a really, really high fever can be dangerous because it can denature some of the proteins in your body, and then your body has trouble doing its job and helping you stay alive. Now, a small bit of fever is enough to help speed up the immune system and help destroy the bacteria that are attacking you. But really high fever puts you in danger as well. Also, another way to denature a protein or to unfold it is pH. pH is the acidity level. So if your body gets too acidic or too basic, that will unfold the protein and denature it and make it not work correctly. Usually, cold temperatures don't denature proteins, they just slow them down so much that they don't work very well. So, usually, it's hot temperatures that denature proteins. Cold temperatures don't denature them, they just slow them down. So, here are some more examples of proteins. Your muscles are made of protein, of course. Skin, hair, fingernails, and claws are all made of proteins, specifically the proteins collagen and keratin. Digestive enzymes are a type of protein that are found in your stomach, like pepsin, and there are even digestive enzymes in your saliva. And those also begin the process of breaking down your food. It's actually important to chew your food before swallowing and getting that saliva because my Uncle Bruce had an illness that made him unable to swallow. So for about 15 years, he had to eat through a tube in his stomach. And so he still had to chew up his food and spit it out and then put it in a blender and blend it up really good because he needed the enzymes from his spit to be able to digest the food. Then he would put the food into this big old syringe with no needle and squirt it into his stomach, and his stomach would digest it. But he had to chew it first because he needed the enzymes in his saliva. And the really cool thing is, after 15 years, finally science and medicine caught up with his problem, and they actually did surgery, and now he's able to eat again. He can actually swallow. So he no longer has that tube in his stomach anymore, which is really cool. Now, jobs of proteins include all sorts of random stuff. So if you're not sure what something is made of and it's got this random job and it's not quick energy and it's not storing energy, then it's probably a protein. So, for example, hormones send signals, and remember, some hormones are proteins, some are lipids. Proteins are used for movement. Your muscles are made of protein and they help your body move. Your immune system is made of proteins and that helps protect you against germs. White blood cells are made of proteins. Enzymes are a type of protein that speeds up a chemical reaction like digestion. And hemoglobin is another protein that carries oxygen through the bloodstream. Examples of food with protein include meat, eggs, and nuts. And when I say meat, I mean fish, chicken, beef, pork, any kind of meat has lots of protein in it. Nuts have both the protein and they have some healthy lipids. Finally, the fourth group of macromolecules are nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are the polymer, the large molecule, and nucleotides are the monomers, the building blocks that make nucleic acids. So, an example of nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. And DNA and RNA are used to store and transfer genetic information. Every cell in your body has the exact same DNA. So wait a minute. So your hair has the same DNA as a stomach cell, which has the same DNA as a skin cell, which has the same DNA as your fingernail. What? How is that possible? Well, what happens is the DNA is like the entire instruction manual for your body. And the hair uses just a little bit, a little piece of that instruction manual. It doesn't use the entire, all the information. It just uses part of the information that refers to your hair. And so that's how each cell acts differently, is that it reads and uses the portion of the DNA that applies to that type of cell, and the rest of it is ignored. So all living things have nucleic acids. All living things have either DNA or RNA or both. So, for example, salt was never alive, so it does not have DNA and RNA. And water was never living, so that does not have DNA and, or RNA. But most foods do. Any food made of plants, including wheat and flour, and any food made of animals, meat, eggs, milk, which was from the animal, all of those have DNA and RNA. So they don't really provide nutrients, they provide the instructions when that living thing was growing and living in the past before you ate it. So we talked about how confusing a diet can be and how confusing it is about losing weight. There are two most common weight loss programs. There's a low fat or low calorie program, and there's a low carb program. The low fat, see, remember, fat has the most calories. So when you try to do low fat, you're trying to do low calorie and restrict how many total calories you get. And that's one way you can lose weight. But then there's the low carb way. If you keep the carbs down, remember, simple carbs turn into sugars, and sugars can make you fat. So if you try to eat as few simple carbs as possible and eat only the complex carbohydrates, the meat and the fat, then you get full, but you still lose weight. If you choose to do a low carb diet, you have to have enough fat to stay full. When I did low carb, I put butter in my eggs in the morning, I put heavy whipping cream in my coffee in the morning, and I had to, because when I got started, I didn't eat enough fat and I was starved all the time. When you eat that fat, it fills you up, and then you don't end up eating as much, and then you lose weight. So how do you know what macromolecules are in food? Well, there's a test for the carbohydrate sugar and a test for the carbohydrate starch. There's a test for lipids, and there's a test for protein. There's not really a test for nucleic acids, DNA and RNA, because if it's alive, it has it. And DNA and RNA don't really provide the nutrients in your food like the others do. So if you're going to test for simple sugars, so this will not do table sugar. See, sucrose is table sugar. And sucrose will break down into glucose, the simplest sugar, and fructose, the second simplest sugar. So this test will only test for glucose and fructose, the simple sugars, not for sucrose. But you can usually read the ingredients and see that sugar has been added if you're curious to see how much of that's in there. So what you do, you put the food in the Benedict solution, which is blue, and then you heat it. And if it turns bright orange, then yes, there's sugar, simple sugars in that food. But if the solution stays blue after you heat it, then there are no simple sugars. Now, in between blue and orange, there's a few other colors. So if it turns green, then there's a tiny bit of sugar. If it turns yellow, there's a little more sugar. And if it turns orange, then there's lots of simple sugars. When you test for starches, you will use an iodine solution, such as Lugol's solution. Iodine is kind of a yellowy solution. It's a pale color. And if you put a piece of bread with lots of starch in the iodine solution, then the iodine will turn from that pale light yellow to a dark color like black or brown, or possibly blue or purple or gray or some dark color. But black and brown are the most common shades, and maybe a deep, deep navy blue. If you're going to test for a lipid, there's two tests for this one. The one you need to know for your test is the brown paper bag test. For example, think of French fries. When you get a little bag of French fries, have you noticed the bag gets a greasy spot? Well, that's the test. If a paper bag turns greasy looking, then there are lipids. There's grease on the French fries. And so what you do, take, say, a Ritz cracker, rub it against a brown paper bag, and if it leaves a greasy spot, which it will, then there are lipids. There's butter in Ritz crackers. There's another test that uses the chemical, and this chemical is a white liquid, and if there are lipids, it turns orange. You will see that lipid test on a virtual lab you will do later. Next is the protein test. To test for proteins, use the Biuret test. Biuret solution is another blue solution, so Benedict's and Biuret are both blue. But then, remember, Benedict's turns orange if there are sugars and it's got to be heated. Biuret, you just put it in there, there's no heating, and it will turn purple if there are proteins. So protein purple. See the letter P, protein purple. That will help you remember that if it turns purple, you have proteins. On the last page of your notes, there is a summary. Use your notes to fill in each of these examples. Notice here we want examples of carbohydrates, and I've given you the first letter to help you. That can be found back on the first page of your notes. Here are some examples of carbohydrates listed here. Next, we want the monomer for carbohydrates. That's listed at the beginning. Carbohydrates are made of sugars. Those are the monomers, or the building blocks for carbohydrates. Now, what functions, what uses? Here are the functions of carbohydrates. Next, what test is used to detect carbohydrates? That's at the end of your notes, and there's the carbohydrate tests, one for sugar and one for starch. And if it's a positive test, what color will it turn for each of those tests? Then you'll answer those same questions for lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So just use the notes you just took to fill in this worksheet.